Yeah, we can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Soibam Haripriya to today's webinar. Before we start the proceedings, there are a few initial announcements. May I request all of you to please keep your microphone on mute for the duration of the program. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. We usually do it this way. We ask people to type in their questions to the chat box and we take them up one by one for the speaker. One of us will read out the questions for her. Without further ado, may I request Professor Michael Tharagan to please take over the proceedings.
Can you hear me? I mean, hello.
Oh, we can hear you now.
No,
okay.
we can.
Yeah.
Okay, I was welcoming Dr. Soibam Haripriya to this KCHR gathering. We have great pleasure in discussing along with you this very well titled subject for discussion. In fact, it sounds very interesting and very intriguing too. Fractured friendships, the politics of befriending in conflict zones. Those who had to live in a conflict zone would know this issue much better than others, because others can only feel it from renderings from people who have really experienced it. And I'm sure that some of the issues that you are going to raise, as you have already put across through your abstract, especially how people find it difficult in a conflict zone to be constantly viewed and reviewed and discussed, impairing relationships, genuine relationships, and the tendency of a society to club people into different groups. All that are issues which is very pertinent in many parts of the world. And I'm sure that we are going to have a very interesting discussion. I welcome and introduce Dr. Soibam Haripriya. I'm sorry, I've got some problem with my throat and my sound, so excuse me for being erratic in my statements. Welcome, Dr. Haripriya.
Thank you. Thank you so much to KCHR for giving me this platform to share my thoughts. Thank you, Professor Michael Tharakan, and thank you, Rachel and Fasia, for organizing this. Yeah, so as the title of my talk today goes, it's Fractured Friendships, the Politics of Befriending in Conflict Zones. So I'll begin by giving a brief abstract of the talk today so that we can so that the framework of how I go about to think about friendship is clear. So in this talk, what I do is I attempt to understand relationships fostered in conflict sites and how negotiation with trust form a backdrop of such relationships. So rather than trust being foundational to relationships, either familial or that of friendship, it is the continuing negotiation with trust and the ambivalences that accounts for life. So in this talk, what I do is I attempt to place friendship and familial relationship in a relationship of skepticism that sometimes translates as suspicion. And I trace the suspicion to the law, that is AFSPA, that radically changes or marginalizes the space of the domestic. So here, this domestic is, I argue that this domestic is very different from other kinds of domestic. Here, the most ordinary of kin relations where one expects a patriarchal protection of the domestic from the world at large is not a given. And when I say here, I mean the disturbed areas. I will go into it later part of the talk. So in this space where the domestic cannot be a taken for granted space of patriarchal protection, I look at the space of the domestic as created within the trope of nation in danger. So the nation in danger provides this larger trope that provides for the larger framework within which shared blood transforms into spilled blood. And I do this through two sections of the talk. In the first section of the talk, what I have titled as News of a Beloved Friend, I take recourse to fiction to underscore. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. So in the first part of the talk that I title as News of a Beloved Friend, I take recourse to fiction to underscore the precarity of friendship and overturn the acknowledgement of friendship, to suggest that the very act of acknowledging friends can be a possible manifestation of betrayal, or it is the possibility of betrayal. So what I'm not trying to sort of say that mistrust is the only possible manifestation of friendship in violent field sites, but rather to present mistrust and trust as an elaborate and necessary negotiation. So that is what I discussed in the first part of the talk. In the second part of the talk that I've titled as Violence in and Language, I analyze the one scheme, that is the rehabilitation scheme of militants in the Northeast, and how this scheme pans out for youth caught in the web of surrender drama and the willful framing of male youths as primary recruits to quote unquote militant outfits. And so in this section, I look at how state policies manifest in the lives of young people who are shunned by their friends in their desire to move themselves from the gaze of both the state security forces and the non-state. So in this two sections, I argue for an understanding of friendship and kinship that moves from shed blood to spilled blood. So that's very brief how I organize my talk today. So here, it's just my interest in friendship, why I'm interested in thinking through friendship is because of the context that is the sites of violence that I talk about. And sites of violence, they inflect intimate relationships, whether familiar or friendship, in very different ways. And one of the first problems that I encounter in trying to sort of think through this is of definition. How do we define a friend? And also my interest in friendship is because in the medium that I usually engage with, that is poetry and fiction in social anthropology, what I found is, at least in the case of poetry, friendship seems to be secondary to romantic love. And until recently in social anthropology, what we find is social anthropology has always looked at friendship as a residual category, lower in hierarchy as compared to kinship. So my interest lies in how friendship is always thought about as, not as secondary to other kinds of relatedness. And like I said, defining who is a friend or what it means to be a friend is difficult due to the ambiguity of the category of friendship. And I draw a lot of what I am thinking today from Killick and Desai's work titled The Ways of Friendship. So and I quote from their work, "Friendship is interesting precisely because it evades definition. The ways in which friendship acts to express fixity and fluidity in diverse social worlds is exciting and problematic for people that practice friendship and the social scientists that studies it," close quote. So friendship it defies definition also because it is not institutionalized. For example, romantic love might see its culmination in marriage, which is institutionalized, or even say live-in relationship, cohabitation between heterosexual partner is institutionalized in that sense. So there is a sense of understanding or defining that relationship. But because friendship does not have that institutional, say, space in that sense, there is an ambiguity that in that relationship, right? And also there's no sense of, say, closure when I stop becoming friends with someone. There's no sense of, or a sense of leaving and joining friendship. It's not formalized as in other relationships. So that makes friendship interesting, but also makes it difficult to sort of see what it is. I quote from another work of Rokill, who describes like this. I quote, "Whereas kinship speaks to formalize and fix social relations with clear expectation and duties, friendship embraces doubt and ambiguity as central to the formation and experience of friends," close quote. So because it embraces doubt and ambiguity, and that aspect is already built into friendships, it becomes interesting as to what is the fallout of this in a site of violence. And I go back to Manipuri, Meiteilon language, to look at how we think of friendship. In Meiteilon, there is an equivalence of terminology of the terms of how we refer to kin relations and friendship is one can draw an analogy between the two. So I pick up three terms which refers to friend. One is itau. Itau is a gender neutral term. The more common term is imanaba for my male friends, imanabi for my women friends. So ba is a male suffix and b is a female suffix, and the prefix e means blood, and manaba means same. Right, so the most kinship terms also prefix e, right? Ima, mother, e is blood, right? Ipa, father, e again blood. So what I'm trying to do is trying to look at how there is an equivalence in the terminology that refers to friendship and that refers to kinship, the sameness. And for friendship, it is what has been suggested, or what it seems to be suggested, is that there is a sameness of the blood of the self with that of the friend. And it seems to keep friendship at par with, it seems to place friendship at par with kinship, shared blood and substances. So, but by this, I'm not trying to argue that practices and relations of friendship is identical to that of kinship, but the terminology suggests a closeness akin to that of blood ties. Friendship between men and between women is interesting for different reasons. For the context that I speak about, it is interesting because though men have the freedom to pursue friendships, which might not be available to the same degree for women, in a highly militarized context that I speak about, male friendships may face increasing state surveillance as well as from that of the family, and the overarching nationalist discourse and violent sentiments of a particular kind may make it impossible to pursue friendship beyond boundaries of ethnic community, religion, and other such belongings. So I take recourse to two essays that I found very useful to think about the surveillance of friendship by the family and by the by state and nationalist discourse. So there's this essay, Muslim Mothers in Times of Terror, and there's another essay, The Afterlives of Impossible Friendships. So I found these two texts quite illustrative of the kind of, what does the surveillance and what does the nationalist discourse and kind of jingoism do, what kind of manifestation it have on friendship between men. So like I stated in the beginning, in this talk today, I briefly look at the impact of state-endangered violence on friendship and kinship. The context that must be clear by now is Manipur, but I draw similarities with other sites of state-endangered violence manifested through the law that designates place as quote-unquote disturbed area. So by now it is clear that I'm talking about AFSPA. The imminent threat of that manifested through AFSPA is where I locate my study. And I will not go into details of AFSPA. I'm sure all of us here today know what is AFSPA, but I will flag only two very significant aspects of AFSPA. First, that it is one of the very few laws in which one can be apprehended or killed before one has committed a cognizable offense, right? I quote from the law, I quote from the act, against whom a reasonable suspicion exists that he is about to commit a cognizable offense, close quote. So it is a rare law in that sense, right? And second, related to the first, that the law operates on the premise of suspicion rather than guilt. So this context, though it must be repetitive for a lot of people here, this context is important to place because one tends to misrecognize such fields where, and people from such fields such sites are perceived to be inherently mistrustful and violent towards each other. And when we come into such a conclusion, what we do is it ignores the authoritarian and violent setting within which friendships are nurtured, fostering an atmosphere of mutual suspicion, both within and to those outside of the community. The suspicion embedded in the word of the law does not remain confined to itself, since the law does not stand outside of life. The judgment pronounced by the word of law in turn becomes the basis of how we judge each other. So we easily forget that the mistrustful way of engendering sociality are fostered by the context and also by the fact that friends live in the same context, trying to make sense of the marginal status they occupy in their own space of belonging, although with different sets of privileges. And also, I begin the talk with the idea of how this domestic is very different from other domestic. I say this because there is a glorification of the heterosexual family and the gender roles that women and men play within this unit. But the glorification of the heterosexual family and its gender roles falls short in places of conflict. For instance, in this new book that Atazia writes called Resisting Disappearance, she tells about the case of a mother, Gulbano, whose son Suhail was disappeared. And it's very interesting. We can go into this in the question and answer session of how she uses the word disappeared as a verb. So the son, Gulbano's son Suhail, was disappeared by the state. Suhail was one of 6 brothers. So first, what happened was that as persons were cast, whether actually Gulbano had a son called Suhail or not. And when she was able to establish that she indeed has a son called Suhail, she was told by the army officer that the disappearance of one son should not matter when she still has 5 others. So the state gives legitimacy to the institution of the family. Likewise, fear of the disintegration of the nation state can make the state target the family as a microcosm of the larger ills that ails that society. The family in the latter case is taken as a background of insurgent sentiments. So, I mean, some of us here who are from the Northeast would know that they would know about the phase of the secret killing in Assam, where families and friends of the of the ULFA, the United Liberation Front of AHOM members. So ULFA members, families and friends of ULFA members were used as a conduit to pressurize ULFAs to surrender, failing which siblings and sometimes entire families were extrajudicially executed. So this is an example of how the family also operates as a mode of state control. So, and another, I want to briefly give another example of how what happens to the domestic and such a site. So a friend of mine from Imphal narrated the story to me about coming back late at night. This is a event that happened in the 1990s, which is a particularly violent times when we were growing up. So he and a couple of friends were coming back late at night from a festive occasion. And he was a young adult at that time. And this group of boys were stopped by the police. When interrogated due to the brashness of youth, they gave a cocky response to the police, because of which all of them were beaten up. There were lashes on their calves and buttocks. This was construed as a mild punishment to be laughed at by the elders when they reached home. The elders responded to the situation with the statement, "Pare noi liming lore," which means it is okay, your liming loba has happened. So what is liming loba? Liming loba is a rite of passage through which one enters the world of adulthood. The statement of the elders, though seemingly jocular, suggests that with the inevitability of adulthood comes the inevitability of confrontation with the security forces, the army or the police. The elders' response also suggests the impossibility of the family and the kin protecting the youth from state violence. In the absence of any recourse against state violence, their care inevitably translates as asking the youth to be careful or to laugh off incidents which are regarded as minor transgression. In fact, rather than the family and kin protecting one from state violence, it is possible that the very fact of being kins makes one susceptible to violence. This also translates as the incapacity of the family and family and kins to provide mechanism and sanctuary for individuals against state violence. Familial relation and kinship is based on the notion of shared blood, and this blood ties evoke or is supposed to evoke a feeling of responsibility towards kins. However, in a militarized location of spilled blood, shared blood becomes a liability, especially in the context of counterinsurgency operations. So with this brief introduction, I quickly go to the first section of my talk, which is an analysis of a short story titled Nungshiraba Marupki Mapao, which means, which translates as news of a beloved friend, right? I'll begin this section with a small anecdote. While growing up in the particularly fraught times of the 1990s, we were cautioned, especially at dusk, that if someone calls out our name, we should not respond immediately. We were told that dusk is a time of malicious spirits and ghosts who sometimes come in the guise of a close friend who mimics the voice of the friend and using that voice coax one from safety towards danger. So while this caution that our parents used to give us is based on a folk belief, the context of retelling makes it interesting. Cautionary tales of friendship and spirits is part of the folk repertoire, and one can read this short story, Nungshiraba Marupki Mapao by Sudhir Ranjan Moirangthem, as a similar cautionary tale of friendship. So here, what happens in this short story, the frame is that the arrest of a close friend who in the process of interrogation was asked the name of his friends led to the arrest of the protagonist. The protagonist is referred to only as he in the story. And after the protagonist was arrested, he gave the name of other friends, leading to arrest of other friends. So this short story inverts the idea of naming and acknowledging friendships. To be declared a friend is to be publicly acknowledged as such. However, to be declared a friend in the process of interrogation is quite another thing altogether. In the short story, the unnamed protagonist was picked up by the state forces and was asked to name his friends. He was released from custody after he gave the name of his friends, sparking off what Dhananjit Singh describes in his commentary on the story as, I quote, chain reactions of arrest and custodial deaths. close quote. So while the protagonist did not give much thought to his own act of naming his friend, however, when another friend comes to meet him and apologize for having given his name during interrogation, the reason of his arrest, right? The protagonist realized the reason for his arrest, and now he feared for the safety of his friend Jeevan, whose name he had mentioned during his interrogation. So he went to Jeevan to warn him. And Jeevan laughed off without revealing to Jeevan that actually I have given your name during my interrogation. So Jeevan laughed off the warning and responded that no one can be caught or captured for no reason whatsoever. He stated that he need not worry on that count because he is not a suspicious character. He has not done anything that warrants suspicion. The protagonist was quite hurt by Jeevan's remark, and he asked him, I quote, "So there must be a reason that they detained me as well," close quote, to which Jeevan said, "There must be. How can you be caught up? How can anyone be caught without any reason whatsoever?" This exchange illustrates the precarity of friendship, where mistrust is central to the making of lives in conflict. Friendship does not stand alone from the larger context in which it locates itself. In certain, I quote, "In certain and untrustworthy totalitarian institutional setting, people are wary regarding whom to trust and whom to befriend," close quote. However, this does not mean that mistrust is the only abiding aspect of such friendships fostered in violent sites. The phrase, "Taja sikadai, tazaru sikadai," one often hears this phrase. It also figures in the short story as a musing by the protagonist, when the protagonist hears many versions of his arrest, detention, and for torture, to trust or not to trust. In the latter part of the story, Jeevan was shot at on the imputation of being a police informer. He was involved in a small business of buying things from the police canteen and selling it on retail. So due to which he was suspected of being a police informer. So that such an incident happened to Jeevan, who maintained that no one can be under the radar of suspicion without any reason, is the suggested irony. So, and as the story further goes, sometime after the protagonist was released from custody, he heard the news of his own death. Contrary to one's death being an event in someone else's life, certainly in sites of violence, your own death can become an event in your own life, and one can die many times as well. The protagonist laughs absurdly, hearing the news of his own death, and his curiosity brings him to the morgue to see his corpse. The corpse was bullet-ridden, wearing combat attire. The protagonist makes an offhand comment in his head that many men have disappeared wearing whatever they were wearing, but seem to miraculously change into combat attire when dead. He mulls over who was this other who had died, from whose body you can see signs of being tortured and signs of being shot at. Whose friend was he? In what process of interrogation, acknowledgement, or betrayal of which friend has his namesake lost his life? So the story implies that the person who was killed shares the same name as the protagonist, and this led the protagonist to think about his multiple names. I quote, "As for names, he has many. How many names does he have? With how much love has those names been given to him? His grandfather called him by one name, his grandmother by another, his aunt yet another. On top of that, his birth chart given name, the locality, and the name in his certificate. That he's called by those many names according to who is addressing him. Isn't that a sign of their love for him? At that time, he used to think, so many loved him dearly." So this is my translation of the protagonist musing about the many names that he has. If naming of friends is difficult, so are the names that one has. It is believed that Elias Puyamadi Soitre, if one has many Eliases, if one has many names, right, it is sure. And then the voice trails off. What is left unsaid is that if one has many names other than what you are called affectionately at home and at workplace or the official name, then one comes in the web of suspicion. For the state, multiple names suggest a lack of legibility. The subject becomes unknowable, moving between multiple names as it were. The same gaze of legibility is the same gaze of the lack of legibility is turned inwards. The above excerpt, when juxtaposed with if one has many names, if one has many aliases, speaks of the practice of multiple names that one gives to one's kin, and yet one is made to look at one's own practice, cultural practice, with suspicion, suggesting that the overarching climate of fear translates into ways in which we look at each other through the lens of the state and how it defines us, and we define each other likewise. I quickly come to the next section of my talk, which I've very boringly titled Violence and Language. I'll rework it later. So here I begin with this very problematic way in which we kind of relate quote unquote militancy with unemployment, right? And I was referring to this sociologist Nongkinri's essay on the problems of youth in Northeast, and he states, Nongkinri in his work states that unemployment is one of the major problem of youth in Northeast, but he gives a very interesting a different way of looking at it, which is that he makes this proposition that on the one hand, there is no government support for youths looking for productive and gainful employment, and the existing few employment opportunities are negotiated through network of nepotism and corruption. So you see this on the one hand, and on the other hand, what you see is that, and I quote from his essay, quote, the government has created employment packages for rehabilitating those youth who had surrendered before the authority after being in insurgent movements, close quote. Nongkinri states that and he interviewed various community leaders in most of the states of the Northeast, and he states that the opinion of the community leaders is that such a posturing from the side of the government will lead the youth to, quote, think and act differently to enjoy the benefits of such employment packages, so close quote. So you see that firstly, there's an immediate sort of a relationship drawn between youth and being youth and unemployment and being members of insurgent movements. And on the other hand, we also see that there is no employment opportunities for youth. And on the other hand, there is not so many schemes or, schemes or ways for this youth, except these rehabilitation schemes for, as the wording of the scheme says, for youths who have surrendered before the authority after being in insurgent movements. So the immediate relationship drawn between unemployment and militancy means that unemployed youths are looked at as troublesome figures. And what is very significant about the short story that I sort of briefly paraphrase for us today here is that most of the young men in that network of friendship were all unemployed, and they were all hustling. They were all doing all these side business to stay alive for their livelihoods. For example, Jeevan, who was buying items from the police canteen and selling it on retail, or the protagonist himself, whose employment is not revealed, but they are always, there is a way in which these youths, because they are unemployed and they are and that they're unemployed also suggests that they belong to a particular economic strata and a socio, and also suggests the lack of a socio-cultural capital where they cannot get jobs in through the network of nepotism and corruption, as Nongkinri describes. So the protagonist of News of a Beloved Friend also falls in this category of troubled and troublesome figure who is immediately seen through the gaze of suspicion. So and I juxtapose this reading with what is reported in the newspaper as a surrender drama in the context of the scheme for surrender income rehabilitation of militants in Northeast. These schemes exist in Manipur, this scheme exists in Assam as well. This scheme exists in many parts of the Northeast. So the scheme already reads violence as one of the anticipated avenues for youths, and such schemes become ways wherein betrayal, mistrust, or even explicit harm become part of friendship and kinship, creating an ever-widening circle of suspicion. So this, of course, relates to the willful creation of youth as troublesome figures through the policies of the state. And when I was trying to sort of look at what are the various ways in which young people try to find, or what are the ways in which, how our friendships, what are the ways in which young people try and, find their friendships. Or, when I was trying to look through this work, I was looking at newspaper archives, and I found many incidents of what is called the surrender drama. And I narrate one such incident which happened in Thoubal district of Manipur in 2013. So this happened in 10th January 2013. 7 youths in Hairok Part 2, which is in Thoubal district of Manipur. They were taken to the camp of the 42 Assam Rifles on the pretext of giving jobs. In the camp, they thought that they were going to join the Assam Rifles in some capacity. In the camp, they were forced to sign a surrender document embossed with the word KYKL MDF, Kangle Yawal Kannalo Military Defense Force, which is one of the this is a faction. MDF is a faction of the KYKL group, and KYKL is one of the IDSA reported as one of the insurgent groups operating in Manipur. So the youth were very scared when they saw that the letterhead. The letter that they were supposed to sign has this term in it. The youth were promised a sum of rupees 4,000 per month to join and they were said that they were joining the army in the name of KYKL MDF, right? And an additional sum of rupees 2.5 lakhs were promised to them a few months after their recruitment. So the youth revealed in a meeting with their youth somehow were able to leave the camp. And the youth revealed in a meeting with the media that it was only after repeated insistence to be released from the camp that they were allowed to go back to their respective families. And this led to some skepticism as to whether the youth would have been released by the paramilitary at all in the given circumstances without any tacit agreement, right? So already there's a radar of suspicion with which these youths were looked at. So after this Hairok surrender drama is the term that the newspaper reported the incident as. After the Hairok surrender drama, the Revolutionary People's Front released a statement of warning and advice to parents of youth, I quote, not to fall prey to such surrender dramas or let their children be trapped by false promises of the Indian military, close quote. However, so we have this on the one side, the versions of the youth saying that they were forced to sign something that they were not willing to. They were told that they will be joining the Assam Rifles, but it turned out that they were not. And on the other hand, the Assam Rifles maintain that the youths approached the 42 Assam Rifles by themselves first to surrender. The youth were returned after preliminary investigations revealed that they were not part of KYKL MDF. So it is the youth reported that they were taken to the camp by a woman living in rent in the same locality on the pretext of gainful employment, right? It is very well imaginable that this group of friends lured into the camp will be in the radar of both the army and the non-state armed group henceforth. While this case is not the only reportage of surrender drama that has unfolded in Manipur, and we can read the surrender drama, this unfolding surrender drama, right along the words of the scheme for rehabilitation and surrender and rehabilitation of militants in Northeast. So you can read these unfolding, dramas as something manifested by the policy, by the scheme of the state. So while this is not the only reportage of surrender drama that has unfolded in Manipur, I look at this incident to sort of think through the rehabilitation schemes that present a certain language with which youths are referred to. Surrenderee, surrenderist, recycled militants. Recycled militants means that if you have availed the scheme, you cannot avail the scheme again, right? So what does these terms mean? What consequence does these terms have for the calibration of relationships of intimacy? What should resonate for us, again, is the enmeshed nature of mistrust of a community of people that AFSPA renders as suspicious, whose presence renders the nation in danger, and the percolation of this mistrust in interpersonal relationships, such as revealed by this incident reported in the papers as surrender drama, wherein this woman, and this woman is referred to by the youth through the kin term ine, right? Ine, aunt, right? So a fictive kin because she is not their aunt, but a woman in the locality who's anyway, in a fictive kinship. Right, so in kinship terminology, the woman who lured them to the camp will be an aunt and a trustworthy, a supposedly trustworthy figure in the locality who has ensured this group of friends of finding a gainful employment. The woman's husband was reportedly a surrendered insurgent, now affiliated to the Assam Rifles in some capacity. Right? Going back to Athazia's ethnography again, resisting disappearance, the ethnography tells the story of Basit, a young man who was forced to join the Special Task Force, CADA, due to various compulsions, including harassment by the army. His friends understood the extreme pressure and compulsion due to which Basit joined the STF. However, that they understood why he joined the STF does not mean that they continue to associate with him as they did earlier. Joining the STFs is seen as an active collaboration with the Indian military apparatus and brings Basit under the gaze of both the army as well as the militant groups. And though his family, through various connections, got him out of the STF, and his stint in and he was lucky, his stint in the STF was very brief, yet he was rendered a social outcast. What happened to this group of young adults, involved in the surrender drama, recalls Basit's, what happened to Basit, where his friends dissociated from him for the fear of coming to the radar of both the army and the militant groups. So what should be of concern for us when thinking through relationships of intimacy, whether friendship or familial, is that with militarization and with the law that renders us suspicious citizens, it has the spirit of militarization is not something that remains in certain cordon of spaces. It has percolated down to every walk of life and has colored all relationships. So the imagination of kinship, network, and friendship needs to be rethought in the context where life and death are judicial and consequently arbitrary decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Haripriya. Ms. Michael. Seem to be muted. While we are waiting for him, may I request all of you, if those who have questions or comments to the speaker, to please type them on that box. We will read it to the speaker. Usually take a couple of minutes for the questions to come in. We have the first query in the chat box. Haripriya, shall I read it out?
Yes, yes. I'm unable to see the chat box.
I'll read it out for you if that is fine. So the first query is from Manshi. Manshi asks, I just wanted to know if the loss of familial protection in the conflict areas in Northeast can also be seen as a loss of what can be termed as protective masculinity. If yes, does it in any way alter gender relations within families?
Yeah. Thank you, Manasi, for that question. Yes, the loss of protective masculinity. I, in fact, have, it's, yes, one can read this as a loss of protective masculinity. And I think it, of course, changes gender relations, but there are many different ways in which gender relations are changed. Firstly, it has been not something that I can say only of Manipur, but in many other sites of violence, it is always said that, when a man has to go out of the house, if a woman accompanies the man, then it is seen to be then it's that man is seen to be sort of, he would not have to be stopped at many checkpoints. The woman seems to provide the presence of the woman seems to provide some kind of way in which the man is looked at as non-threatening, right? So rather than say men accompanying women when they go out for their protection, you can say that the sometimes women accompany men, and that sort of give them, or that sort of make them look at as not so threatening by the state forces. Or so there is that kind of change. Or but one of the if you would have seen, Manipur has the highest one of the highest cases of domestic violence, and a very bad male to female ratio. And so one can also see that one of the repercussions is also how that loss of protective masculinity, or how that loss of a masculinity in the public realm, what kind of manifestation it has for the private realm, where men try to regain that lost masculinity in many ways. One of them is through a very gendered definition of culture, the policing of women, the policing of what women wear, the policing of how women are supposed to produce and reproduce culture. So we see the manifestation in many different ways. But you're right that it is that loss is there, but how that loss manifests itself is something that has many wide repercussions in gender relations, and not all of it is something that is positive.
Thank you, Haripriya. Professor Michael Tharakan, I think we lost you for a moment in between. So we started taking up the questions in the chat box. Currently, we are waiting for more questions. So would you like to respond to the talk, and while we wait for the questions?
I just wanted to understand, except outside the security forces, you talked about others also operating in this realm. And is it also institutionalized? I mean, like, whatever in whatever forms in which you build up a very keen relationship, it has to pass a muster in a society which is in constant conflict. Can it be like that? Or I mean, I'm only asking this because you talked about families, your company, and your people with whom you are maintaining company would also be used to pressurize. I mean, and in such situation. So that means possibly there is a kind of an institutionalized violence. I'm putting it in quotes. I mean, I don't know how to whether I worded my question adequately. I'm just stopping here. I hope I've conveyed what I had in mind here.
Thank you, Professor Tharakan. If I got it correctly, when you're asking about how you're asking me if this entire space that I talk about is a space which sees institutionalized violence. Yes, it is institutionalized violence, and yes, also the thing is also the fact that institutionalized violence can take informal forms. So this violence is institutionalized, but if I say, give the example of the forces, if there is a lot of whether in Kashmir, whether in Manipur, whether in Assam at a particular phase, the institutionalized violence wears, faces of anonymity. Right? So you know that people have disappeared, but we don't know where to search these people who have disappeared, these people who have made these people disappear. So so in the talk, I refer to how Athar Zia uses the word disappeared as a verb, as an act of doing, right? So these people have disappeared. We don't know, it can be people who are affiliated with the military or paramilitary forces, but it can also be former members who are rehabilitated or who have become a part of the state in some quasi form, right? So it is a very murky space that I talk about, a very hybridized space. So there is, but one thing that we see is when we see institutionalized violence taking informal forms, right? Then the web of suspicion, whether, there's always many of us, when we go in places of violence to do field work, we all, or other, when we share notes, we always say that, there's always a feeling that everyone is suspicious of each other. Everyone is trying to categorize each other as, is he or she a sympathizer of this group or that group, right? So the informal forms of institutionalized violence warrants this kinds of relationship. That's one of the points that I'm trying to sort of state.
Can I ask one more question, Rachel? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You see, when I was reading Doris Lessing, Nobel Prize winner in 2007, The Good Terrorist, in which, she portrays her main character, Alice, because she is capable of organizing protests, organizing a different opinion and all that. She also becomes a point of exploitation by those who want to get a slogan misinterpreted, a slogan to be misunderstood, because since she is capable of doing good work in organizing people, her work itself is cast with some aspersions, some kinds of lies, and she herself becomes an enemy of her own. I mean, enemy of her own organization. And I had that in mind when I was trying to ask that question. Anyway, yeah, answer is quite revealing and quite useful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Haripriya, shall I move on to the next couple of questions we have in the chat box?
Yeah.
So we have a question from Aruna Kanwar. Thank you for this insightful talk. What do you think about the interaction between this formulation of friendship and mistrust in conflict areas and the ideas of quote unquote chosen families, especially in the context of, say, insurgent groups, etc.?
Aruna, what are chosen families?
Please unmute the mic, and if you wish to clarify the question.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, the idea of chosen family in the sense that rather than your defined family, in the sense like the family that you have by birth, especially in the formulation of friendship in like queer relationships or queer friendships, the idea of the chosen family becomes very pertinent, and then it has been like used in other formulations as well, where like you find some people who sort of have the same. So like I'm running like giving a very bad rundown of it, but like you have people who are like whom you sort of share an emotional and sort of equivalence of kind, and then you sort of make them your chosen family in this sense, instead of going for this family that has been pre-assigned to you. So in that context, like in the sense like that these kind of, when solidarities are formed, like political solidarities are formed, often they end up in the category of chosen families for people who are involved in such activities. So in that context, how does these formulations sort of interact with these kind of ideas?
Yeah, thank you, Arunab. I first thought chosen family in the sense of families who are in the radar of, the state forces. But when we think about the formulation of friendship, right? I mean, in the sense that one describes chosen families, we can think of friendships as the families we choose, right? And in many of the movements, you would see that there is a sense of kinship and solidarity that is in these groups, right? So the idea of, the interaction of friendship and mistrust in conflict areas in one side and chosen families on the other side. When we think about chosen families are families where blood ties is not something that we think of, right? We think of nurture, we think of care. But what I'm talking about is a place where it is difficult to express care, where it is where we are already made suspicious of each other, right? And when we are like when I was talking about how institutionalized violence takes an informal form, and when we talk about chosen families in the sense of non-state armed groups, as the solidarity between them, we also see how mistrust is something that also exists, how there are a lot of fratricidal killings within groups due to mistrust and due to differences in due to growing differences. So what I am talking about in terms of the relationship of trust and mistrust as a negotiation is something that would affect chosen families also, because the informal forms of violence is something that really is seen in sites where the willful policies of the state through the creation of death squads, etc., really and see the presence of something like the death squad is the death squads come into being when I am willing to snitch on people that I belong with earlier, right? So the idea of something like a death squad is already built on mistrust and betrayal. So I don't know if I'm addressing your question, but I see it in this way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haripriya. Our next question is from Annie. Annie asks, I thoroughly enjoyed your talk, ma'am. I'm very interested in the area of female friendship. Could you please suggest some theoretical books on female friendship? I have observed that many women's collectives emerged on the basis of friendship, interestingly, when the emergency was lifted. Do you have any thoughts on why that happened at the time?
Okay. Thank you, Arnie, for the question. Like I said, my interest in friendship grew because I found many less material on friendship, especially in poetry. Like I said, poetry seems to be overwhelmed by romantic love, and social anthropology has given more primacy in the realm of relatedness. Social anthropology has given more primacy on kinship. So I think Shilpa Phatke is coming up with a new book on female friendships, which will be interesting to look out for. Women's, collectives. For the women's movement, I think the collective, for the women's movement, the relationships of friendship is very, very important. I think that is the backbone of women's collectives. Women's movement has nurtured a lot of friendships of women. And very interestingly, in the Allegra Lab has a collection on friendships, which will be very useful to look at. And these are friendships across conflict situations in the world. And I found it very useful for me to look at. The text that I said, Ways of Friendship, is also something that is ways of friendship in anthropological perspective. That is also something that I feel is something that you can look at. I think the scope of female friendship, especially in a conflict site, is, like I said, something earlier, it's something limited because in the name of security and protection, there is, and also because it is not just in the name of security and protection, but because we have a lot of incidents of violations that has happened in the public space, we find that there is a lot of surveillance on the mobility of women, right? So the scope for men to meet and socialize is not to the same degree an available option for women. I think the immediate, when Imphal municipality area was removed from AFSPA, you would see many more women coming out, and we would see, more space for women to meet. And I think that the idea of the protective space being required for women, or I think the conflict is something that is used as a ruse for women to lose their mobility, but it's also really so in that sense. It's also really so in the sense that it's also, it is also the danger associated with, with women being in public spaces that is used as the reason why women cannot, go out in or have a space to build friendships to the extent that men can.
Thank you. Our next question is from Chandra Goswami. Thank you so much for this interesting talk. I was wondering that in the context of uncertainty due to unemployment and volatility and vulnerability due to mobilization, how do friendships allow young people to navigate their lives, shape their aspirations? I'm asking this question particularly concerning growing mobilization, presence of neoliberal ethics in the context of Northeast India, and at the same time, presence of ethnic politics and state violence.
Okay, so the question is in the context of unemployment and vulnerability, how do young people navigate friendships.
Yes, particularly in the context of globalization and simultaneously the presence of ethnic politics and state violence.
Okay, so see when I talk about unemployment and vulnerability, there's friendship is okay. If we at any context, at any context, whether it be of conflict or not of conflict, friendship is something that we all would say that it is a very important aspect of our life. It is something that that is somewhat not given its due space, but something that is very important regardless of whether it's a conflict space or not a conflict space. Many of us would attribute where we are today in our lives on friendships, and many would also say that in the past few years, many of us talk about how different ideas, different kinds of political commitments have made us lose friends or made us move away from certain friends, right? So the navigation of our lives and friendship in the context of a particular time is something quite difficult for me to answer. I think it is something, it's a decision that we make, and this is, these are choices that we make as we go. But what I'm trying to do in this talk is how that in that navigation with friendship, how we are not able to remove ourselves from from where we are located, right? So the how we have to make choices based on the larger realm that we live in, right? And I based my example particularly in the 1990s because it was a particularly fraught times of where our friendships were surveillanced a lot by the family and by the state. And so this but it is for each of us to think about how we navigate friendships and how we shape our aspirations. But what I'm trying to say is that we cannot remove it from a particular authoritarian context that we live in, right? So, and I give an example from, say, Muslim mothers in times of terror, where the mothers tells their son not to befriend, the mothers are very worried that already due to their religion, they are in the radar of the state. So they sort of ask their sons not to befriend anyone who carries visible markers of religion on their body, right? So how, so how do we sort of negotiate with something like that with our family? How do we sort of, so this is clearly my question as to whether our friendships can be something that is apart from the kind of political discourse of a particular time, or to reflect on how many friends have we lost due to our commitments to certain things which which your friends may disagree with, or which your friends may think that it is unsafe. It's unsafe. It has become unsafe to be your friend, right? So I hope I'm addressing your query.
Thank you very much, Haripriya. Next query is from Professor Arunima. Philosophers who have better relationship from Aristotle, Montaigne have expressed an anxiety about how one is the code is no friend, etc. None of them was thinking from a conflict zone. So is there something bigger than the context of the particular that more solidarity may also be the one that makes one anxious about the collapse of this? Second, love and friendship are often seen as being in a continuum with properties that are shared by both fidelity, loyalty, etc. It's mainly in which
I think we've lost Rachel. If you want me to read this out, I can read it out again. We have a small rule that we should type in questions, which is why I typed it in, but she's on a slightly poor connection today. So the first question was philosophers who've written on friendship, which I'm sure Soibam Haripriya is very aware of, from Aristotle, Montaigne to Derrida, have expressed an anxiety about how one thinks about the friend. And here I'm thinking about the quote that's attributed to Aristotle, "Oh, my friend, there is no friend," and so on. None of them was thinking from a conflict zone. So is there something bigger than the context of the particular, in that the moment of solidarity may also be one that makes one anxious about the collapse of this? The second question that I had was, love and friendship are often seen as being in a continuum with properties that are shared by both, fidelity, loyalty, etc. Is there any way in which one can extrapolate from that, from what you have shared here, for thinking about love, another sentiment that is associated with non-romantic contexts, love of the motherland, revolution, etc.? In other words, how can one think about love in the time of conflict? Thank you for your very thought-provoking talk. It's very odd to read out one's own questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Arunima. I don't know whether I can effectively answer the question of how to think of love in the time of conflict. But of course, yes, there is, there is there is a larger, something like you said, bigger than the context of the particular. But in the bigger moments, looking at friendship beyond the particular also has, the universal, right, context of friendship also has a lot of, when I began the talk, I spoke about the ambiguity in friendship. So the ambiguity in friendship, because it's something that is different from other forms of relationships which can be institutionalized. So there is a lot of you mentioned the word anxious about the collapse of friendship, and I feel that that is very much a part of the context of friendship, whether in conflict or in a larger context. There's an anxiety around friendships. There's an anxiety because when you said about fidelity, loyalty, etc., there is a, when we talk about the loyalty in the context of romantic love, we, unless we're talking about polyamorous relationship, etc., there's a tacit unspoken agreement that the loyalty is towards one, right? In friendship, there's a lot of anxiety that stems into relationship when we see the presence of, say, another person in my best friend's life, or, there's always this anxiety because there's a lot of, the focus in romantic relationship can be with one person, whereas in friendship there is a lot of other other friendships that may that may impact, or that may have its manifestation as an anxiety about loss of friendship, etc. And also when I was thinking about this, in trying to think about this beginning from a larger context of friendship, I was thinking about how in other kinds of relationships there is, especially in romantic relationship, there is a notion of closure. If things doesn't work out, there's a notion of a closure being a demand that we can ask when things have fallen apart. Whereas in friendship, that's something that is a bit differently organized, in the sense that we have lost touch with many friends and there are many times you do not know the reason why that friendship has failed to to continue, right? So yes, you're right about how that there is a larger, something bigger about friendships. But I think in the bigger thing also there is a lot of that anxiety is something that is part of friendships, which is perhaps with any other relatedness, any other relationships of relatedness. So the other, I hope I'm addressing it in the manner that it's asked of me. The other question around love. yes, and especially in conflict situation, we would see love not in a non-romantic context, love for the motherland, love for very sort of love manifested in not as romantic relationships. And what Arunab asked about chosen family is also on the one of the aspect of the chosen family is love, and love and trust, and all the things that accompanies love, right? So there's a lot of love, or the use of there's a lot of expression of love in the non-romantic setting, in the context of the context of conflict. But again, there is what I'm saying is that the context demands something out of that love, right? So in the accompanying things out of love, non-betrayal, right? No, so what I'm saying is, when I acknowledge that I love someone, what I'm trying to say is that, say, in an interrogation room, what happens when I acknowledge that? What happens when I acknowledge my friend, right? So I'm talking about the space where certain things are inversed, that my acknowledgement in a space would mean a completely different thing. So acknowledging that I love a man who is in a non-state armed group. What happens when I acknowledge that in the space of in this space, right? So there are certain inversions that I feel that the particular context brings into this relationship. That is what I'm trying to think about.
Thank you. We have a question from Rachel. She says, in this talk and in your work, you navigate through different kinds of material, law, personal narratives, reports, literature. You have also looked closely at poetry, both as an academic and as a poet. I wish to know more about the ways in which you negotiated these different kinds of material to study these themes that are complex and intimate in a sense.
Yeah, the use of poetry and fiction has been something that I'm sort of engaged with in social anthropology, because and I think I've said this in other occasion, that it is I hope I'm still audible. My screen went off, but yeah.
Yes, you are. You are.
Yeah. So one of the, I wanted to sort of look at the conflict space I wanted to look at the conflict space, being loyal to that space, being loyal to the people I've met with, to my own life and to the life of my friends and kins in that space. And how do I continue? It's difficult to continue to work in such a field and recuperate the entirety of the field by using quote unquote informants. I say quote unquote informants because many of the vignettes I speak about are from friends as well, right? So when I'm trying to look at the different kind of material, narratives, reports, literature, I'm trying to sort of also look at the social anthropology, where the boundaries are a bit pushed, where I continue to talk about the field, but I also safeguard the identity of the people who have told me their stories, or who have, so the story about friendship, for instance, the story about friendship could be told through narratives from my friends, through narratives from people I've met, through narratives of people who have told me their stories. But I find fiction might be something more effective in that I'm not jeopardizing anyone's identity, and also that I'm agreeing to the tacit agreement of confidentiality within which the stories are shared to me. So these are the negotiations I make when I try to sort of use narratives. And it's been, the PhD journey has been something where many things have been left unsaid rather than said. And so the use of other materials, the ways of saying things that are, the ways of not keeping silent, but saying things in a different way is something that I've been trying to sort of look at methodologically also. So that's where I sort of explore materials and look at it in a particular way. Use it to enhance our work on social anthropology.
Thank you. There's a question from Kalyani Menon Singh. She says, thanks for your deep and thoughtful analysis. I'm just wondering if you have explored what happens to young people who have moved out of the conflict zones and have gone into a new setting, university in another place, for instance, and are called on to form new friendships. What a struggle it must be to be in a situation where friends is assumed to mean trust and loyalty. How do they get the new friends to even understand how hard it is to discard mistrust?
Thank you, Kalyani, for this very, I mean, this is a very poignant thing that you have put up, how, you know, to move out of these spaces, to move out of these spaces and to move back in is also another thing, you know, another sort of struggle altogether. The new, you know, new forms of friendship, it's when when trying to work in the context and it must be something, it is a shared experience with many people. Say, for example, someone who wants to work in Kashmir, someone who wants to work in the Northeast. You know, when one is apart, like, you know, or when people who, when someone who do not belong to that setting goes to work there, when as a researcher you go to work in a conflict place where you're already seen as somewhat complicit, even though you're not personally, say, in support of the state endangered violence, but when you are seen as, you know, complicit to that, to the project of, to the Indian nation project, right? How does, so it's something that we see on both ways. If for example, as an Indian going to work in Kashmir, what does it mean for some, you know, what does it mean? Even if your solidarity lies with people, how do you sort of struggle with the lens of suspicion that is gazed at you? Do you, so I think one of the problem that is that there's always an easy dismissal that these people are suspicious of outsiders. And that is something that I've heard a lot during my work as well, that these group of people are very insular, they are very polarized, they make friendships only within themselves and they do not open up, right? So, but you put it in a different way, how, you know, you put it in a more, you know, you put it in a very sensitive way as to how to understand this mistrust, right? And it's very rare that people put it in this framework, that already there's a institutionalized way in which mistrust has become one of the forms of how we try to survive, right? How we try to, you know, this way in which I was saying that we always try to categorize that who is this person, where does this person's sympathy lies, right? That is a way of trying to categorize. There's a way of wanting to trust and negotiating with mistrust. So it is a struggle, and we would also be, you know, should also be sensitive to how, you know, if one would be looked at with suspicion if you say go to the Northeast to do research, already you'd be seen in a particular lens, and how would you sort of negotiate with that, instead of saying that these are a group of people who are always suspicious of those outside the community, those outside their, you know, those outside their boundaries of belonging. So thank you for putting it in a different way, actually. Thank you, Kalyani.
Both Rachel and Annie Maria Simon thanking you. As of now, we've come to the end of the written questions in the chat box. If there is somebody who finds it difficult to type and is eager to ask a question, to use the raise hand option so that we can call on you. I don't think there are any more questions, so it's my extremely sort of pleasurable task to thank you, Soibam Haripriya, for this absolutely wonderful talk. Thank you so much for having agreed to our invitation, and we hope you'll come again and share your research with us, which will be at a different stage. And I have to also tell you that I have read your poems and I really like them very much. So I did want to tell you that, but didn't want to say that right off in the beginning. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haripriya. We appreciated your talk and we profited also from the talk, I presume. I hope we will get more chances to interact with you. You'll be coming again to the KCHR, we hope, for such gatherings. So
Thank you
all
so
the
much.
best. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are many thank yous from friends and others. Haripriya, will you have a look at the chat box?
Yes. Yeah.
Matthew and Lamnetham, Haukib and Manushi are all thanking you. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. And yeah.
Not at all. It's our pleasure entirely. Thank you.